The letter in my hands felt like a bad joke, a prank, some cruel, absurd mistake. But as I read the bold, condescending words again, the knot in my stomach tightened. Dear homeowner, we are pleased to welcome you to the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. As a new member, you are required to adhere to the guidelines set forth by the HOA, including but not limited to property maintenance, monthly dues, and compliance with our community standards. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and potential foreclosure. My hands trembled. Foreclosure? Compliance? What the hell was this? I had lived in this house for 5 years. It was mine. Paid for, protected, and free from any ridiculous HOA nonsense. That was one of the reasons I'd moved here in the first place. No power-hungry committee dictating what color I could paint my house. No ridiculous fees. No threats over the height of my grass. But this letter? This smug, arrogant piece of paper claimed otherwise. The sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. I looked up to see a sleek, overpriced SUV rolling into my driveway, blocking my truck in. The door swung open, and a woman in a tailored blazer and ridiculous designer sunglasses stepped out, clipboard in hand. Her lips curled in a knowing, patronizing smile as she adjusted the pearl necklace resting on her stiffly ironed blouse. "Ah, you must be Mr. Carter," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness I recognized immediately. The kind of tone people use when they thought they owned you. I didn't move from my porch. I folded my arms. I'd dealt with enough corporate sharks in my legal career to know exactly what I was dealing with. "Who are you, and why are you trespassing on my property?" She laughed, as if I had just made the most adorable mistake. "I'm Karen Holloway, president of the Oak Ridge HOA. I assume you received our letter." I clenched my jaw. "Yeah, I received it, and I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I don't belong to any HOA. She clicked her tongue, flipping through her clipboard like she was reading my death sentence. "Oh, but you do now. You see, as of last month, the HOA has annexed this neighborhood into our jurisdiction. It was all legally approved in our last meeting." She smiled like she had already won. "And since you're now a part of our community, there are a few changes that need to be made. First, you'll need to remove that unsightly tool shed in your backyard. It doesn't align with our aesthetic. Second, your lawn is exactly 1 inch too tall. That'll be a fine if not corrected by the end of the week. And of course, your first HOA dues are due this month. $600. I let out a slow, disbelieving breath. This had to be some kind of joke. "You're out of your mind," I said. Karen's smile didn't falter. She thrived on this, on control, on watching people bend under her rules. "Refusal to comply will lead to legal action, Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, lowering her sunglasses to give me a condescending stare. "I'd hate for you to lose your home over a misunderstanding." A slow, dangerous heat burned in my chest. That was her endgame. She thought she could bulldoze in here with fake authority and intimidate me into handing over my money, my home, my freedom. She had no idea who she was messing with. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this. I stepped off the porch, closing the space between us. "Let me explain something to you, Karen," I said, keeping my voice even. Calm, controlled. She tilted her head, still wearing that smug, self-satisfied grin. "I'm a lawyer," I continued, "and you just stepped onto my property, issued fraudulent legal claims, and attempted to extort money from me with threats of foreclosure. That's not just harassment. That's illegal." Her lips pressed together, her confidence flickering for a brief second before she waved a dismissive hand. "This has already been approved. If you refuse to pay, we'll escalate the matter legally. You won't win." She was so sure, so damn sure that I would roll over like everyone else. I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Karen," I said, tilting my head slightly, "you're about to have the worst legal battle of your life." Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? You just made a massive mistake, I said, stepping back onto my porch. You picked the wrong house, the wrong person, and trust me, you're not prepared for what happens next. For the first time, she looked uneasy. She had walked in here thinking she held all the power, that she could bully me, extort me, and get away with it. But she wasn't dealing with just another homeowner. She was dealing with a lawyer, and I was about to make her regret ever setting foot on my land. The harassment started the very next day. I woke up to find a bright red violation notice taped to my front door, printed in bold letters like a damn eviction warning. Failure to comply with Oak Ridge HOA regulations will result in daily fines until corrective actions are taken. Underneath, Karen had personally scrawled, "Lawn exceeds height restrictions. Immediate action required." I stared at the paper, barely able to suppress a laugh. This was how they were going to play it. Petty, pathetic intimidation tactics? Fine, let them try. I took the notice and shredded it into pieces, right there on my porch. By noon, my neighbor Frank, an older guy who'd lived here long before me, came over, shaking his head. "They're doing it to everyone," he muttered, holding up his own letter. "Same violations, same fines. Hell, they even wrote me up for having a garden gnome in my yard." I exhaled sharply, scanning the neighborhood. Several houses now had those same red notices on their doors, like a damn invasion. And at the end of the street, Karen, standing there in her ridiculous designer blazer, clipboard in hand, inspecting people's homes like she owned the place. I watched her walk up to old Mrs. Harris's porch, a frail widow who could barely get around. She was terrified, trembling, trying to explain herself while Karen just stood there, shaking her head in disapproval. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was preying on people who couldn't fight back. Fine, I'd fight back for them. The next day, I made a point to work in my front yard, just as Karen and her lackeys drove by in their overpriced SUVs, glaring at me like I was some sort of criminal. That's when I noticed something. A tiny blinking red light. I stepped closer, narrowing my eyes at the wooden pole near my driveway. And there it was, a camera. A damn security camera installed without my permission, aimed directly at my property. I turned my head, scanning the other houses. More cameras, set up overnight. They were watching us. I turned my gaze toward the street, where Karen sat smugly in her car, watching me through her tinted window. I smiled. Then I grabbed my ladder, climbed up, and yanked the damn thing right off. Within minutes, Karen was marching up my driveway. "That camera is HOA property," she snapped. I twirled it in my hand. "Funny," I said. "It was installed on my property, without my permission. That's trespassing." "It's to ensure compliance," she shot back. "And if you damage HOA property, you'll be charged accordingly." I chuckled. She really thought she could scare me. "Karen," I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice just enough. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to bully this entire neighborhood into submission with fake rules and intimidation." Her lips pressed together, but I saw it, that flicker of doubt. "You think just because you printed some fraudulent letters and slapped a fancy title next to your name, people are going to roll over? That they're going to let you install surveillance on their homes? Threaten them?" I tossed the camera to the ground, watching it shatter. Her eyes widened. "You'll pay for that." I smirked. "No, Karen, you will." I turned my back on her and walked inside. This was war now. The next few days it escalated. I caught a tow truck outside my driveway, hooking up to my truck. Apparently, I had unauthorized vehicles on my property now. I stormed outside before they could tow it, shoving my legal property deed right in the driver's face. "Touch that truck, and I'll have you in court for grand theft auto," I said calmly. He backed off. Karen, however, stood across the street, watching, waiting. Then came the next ridiculous fine, $1,000 for an unapproved fence modification, because I replaced a broken board on my backyard fence. They were throwing everything at me. But what they didn't know, I had been gathering evidence every single day. Surveillance footage of their security cameras being installed illegally, copies of their fraudulent HOA claims, statements from neighbors who had been harassed and threatened. By the end of the week, I had a full case file, and I was done playing defense. Karen thought she was invincible. She had no idea what was coming. I walked into the county clerk's office with a folder so thick it could have been mistaken for a legal textbook. The receptionist barely glanced up before asking, "What's the issue?" I smiled. Fraud, extortion, trespassing, illegal surveillance. Take your pick. That got her attention. Within minutes, I was sitting across from an official, laying out every single violation the HOA had committed. I didn't leave out a single detail. The fraudulent annexation, the illegal security cameras, the fabricated fines, the attempts at forcible property seizure. The clerk frowned as he flipped through my evidence. This isn't legal," he muttered. "There was no annexation approval filed with the county. No documentation supporting their claims." He paused, looking up at me. "You're a lawyer, aren't you?" I smiled. "That obvious?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "People don't usually come in this prepared." His expression darkened. "This is serious. The county's going to investigate this immediately." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. By the time I left, I had two things: a formal complaint filed against the HOA and a date to present my case in court. Karen was about to have the worst month of her life. The next morning, I made sure to enjoy a long, leisurely coffee on my front porch, just in time to watch a county official walk up to Karen's house. She stepped outside in her usual designer outfit, smug and sure of herself. But as the official handed her the legal notice, I saw it. The first crack in her carefully constructed confidence. She flipped through the papers, her expression shifting from irritation to confusion, then to outright panic. She looked up, her eyes scanning the street, until they landed on me. I lifted my coffee mug in a slow, mocking toast. She turned red, furious, shaking, but she didn't say a word, because she knew she was losing. By the end of the week, things started falling apart for her. The county placed an immediate stop on all HOA enforcement actions against my neighborhood. No more fines, no more violations, no more fake liens. And Karen, she tried to fight back. She called a mandatory HOA meeting, summoning her board members like some kind of royal court. So I went. I walked into that stuffy little meeting room, surrounded by Karen's most loyal followers. She smirked as I sat down. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice smooth and condescending. "It's adorable that you think you have a say here." I leaned back, casually setting my thick folder on the table. "Karen," I said, mirroring her fake smile, "I don't just have a say. I have evidence." Her smirk faltered, but she didn't back down. "We don't need to entertain false accusations," she said dismissively, turning to the board. "Mr. Carter is clearly just upset about the rules." I laughed. "Oh, it's not about the rules, Karen." I slid a document across the table. "It's about how you've been breaking the law." One of the board members, a frazzled-looking man in his 50s, picked it up and his face went pale. I kept going. Fraudulent claims of annexation, illegal surveillance, coercion, extortion, and this last one is my personal favorite, embezzlement. Karen's head snapped toward me. "What?" I placed another stack of documents in front of her. "You've been collecting thousands in fines and fees. But the HOA's official records don't show those funds being deposited into the HOA's accounts." A ripple of unease spread through the board members. They were catching on. Karen's eyes darted between them. "This is ridiculous." I cut her off. "You can take it up with the county." I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough. "Or you can take it up with the police. Your choice." Silence. One of the board members, a quiet woman who had barely spoken the whole meeting, stood up. I moved for a vote of no confidence in Karen Holloway as HOA president. The room erupted. I just sat back, watching as Karen's empire crumbled right in front of her. Karen was finished, and she knew it. The moment the words vote of no confidence left that board member's lips, the room turned on her. The same smug lackeys who had once blindly followed her orders were now whispering amongst themselves, stealing nervous glances at me and the evidence I had laid before them. One of the older board members, a man who looked like he had been doing this HOA nonsense for far too long, finally spoke up. "Karen, is this true?" His voice was tense. Karen straightened, still trying to salvage her collapsing kingdom. "Of course not. He's lying, fabricating evidence." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Sure, Karen. I fabricated bank records, county filings, and multiple sworn statements." I tapped the folder. "Oh, and did I mention? The county already confirmed the annexation was illegal. The only fraud happening here is you." Her carefully constructed mask cracked. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She turned to her board members, grasping at whatever control she had left. "You're not actually believing him, are you?" Her voice had lost its smugness. Now it was desperate, sharp, pleading. But the damage was done. The man who had questioned her cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "We can't ignore this. If there's even a chance that money was mishandled." The quiet woman who had called for the vote interrupted. "Then Karen needs to be removed immediately." A few others nodded in agreement. Karen's face went from panic to pure, simmering rage. "You're all pathetic," she hissed. "I built this HOA. I made this community better. And you're going to let him destroy everything? Over some ridiculous accusations?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Karen, you didn't make this community better. You tried to steal from people, harass them, and force them into your little dictatorship. And now, you're facing the consequences." The vote happened right there in that stuffy meeting room. It wasn't even close. 7 votes for her removal. 1 abstained. Karen voted for herself, of course. Didn't matter. She was officially stripped of her title, her power, and any control she thought she had. The moment the decision was final, she exploded. "This isn't over," she shrieked, shoving papers off the table as she stood. "You think you've won? I'll sue. Actually," I interrupted, pulling one last document from my folder. "You'll be dealing with law enforcement first." Her mouth snapped shut. I slid the papers across the table, watching her face twist in confusion before realization slammed into her like a freight train. A formal criminal complaint. The county had moved fast. Once they reviewed my report and cross-checked the HOA's financials, they found discrepancies Karen couldn't explain away. She had embezzled tens of thousands from the HOA accounts, funds that mysteriously disappeared into her personal expenses, vacation trips, and luxury shopping sprees. One of the board members gasped. "Karen, is this true?" Her hands clenched into fists. I need to speak to my lawyer," she stammered. I smirked. "Good idea." Then, as if on cue, the doors to the meeting room opened. 2 county officials walked in, flanking a police officer. Karen froze. She turned to me, her face a twisted mix of fury and disbelief. She still couldn't accept it. She had spent so long getting away with it, with bullying people, with threatening them, with thinking she was untouchable. But now, the law had caught up to her. "Karen Holloway," the officer said, stepping forward, "we need you to come with us." She snapped. "This is harassment. I am the victim here. You can't do this." They didn't argue. The officer simply read her rights as they escorted her out, while the rest of the board sat in stunned silence. I sat back in my chair, watching her last shred of power crumble. She had spent months trying to ruin people's lives. And in the end, she ruined her own. By the time I stepped outside, Karen was being loaded into the squad car, her face red with fury, shouting threats that no one was listening to. Neighbors had gathered, watching the scene unfold, whispering among themselves. Some were smiling, others just looked relieved. Frank walked up beside me, hands in his pockets. "Damn," he muttered. Didn't think it had actually happened. I exhaled, stretching out my shoulders. "Yeah, well, some people only learn the hard way." He chuckled. "And you made sure of that." I nodded, watching as the squad car pulled away. Karen was gone. The HOA's illegal grip was broken, and our neighborhood was finally free. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. No more fake fines. No more threats. Just quiet. And damn, it felt good.